Morning, everybody. This is Jason Pazzi, the DPS staff representative for the Advanced Technology Working Group. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. The ATWG was officially formed as a result of the January 20th, 2022 PSC order on the power grid study recommendations in case 20E-0197. The commission tasked the group with vetting advanced technologies, establishing pathways to the deployment and utility capital planning. The three initial topics reviewed by the group were dynamic line ratings, power flow controls, and energy storage. Today we'll be hearing updates on those three main topics, along with the potential new topics being proposed this year, along with any other updates that the group has. Just go over some logistics for those in the room. Again, bathrooms are out near the elevators, double doors. If you are planning to view the presentation in the WebEx, please keep your computer on mute. We do have these in the spring quite often. A fire drill. The stairwells are out in the hallway as well. You just have to head up to the stairwells and head down, and there'll be instructions from there. So just in case of a fire drill. For those people on the phone, please keep your phones on mute so we don't have any background noise. In terms of questions, we'll be, if there are any questions in the room, please feel free to put your hand up and ask the presenter. On the phone, we'll be monitoring chat. So if there's questions on the phone, please put those in the chat, and Forrest will be monitoring those. And I think that's everything. If you haven't, those in the room, if you haven't done the sign-in sheet, there's a sign-in sheet at the column there. If your name's not on the main list, please fill in your name. Otherwise, you can just check it. Check next to your name. And we'll do a quick roll call for those in the room to start with, and then I'm going to turn it over to King. So just do a quick go around the room. Again, Jason Pazzi with DPS.
Juan Dagger with National Grid.
Nicholas Culpepper, PSG Long Island.
Ben Fa, PSNG Long Island.
Jessica Barco Conrad.
King Look, Con Edison.
Andrew Zielinski, New York ISO.
Phil Hacker, New York Best.
Mike Rajanowski, NYSERDA.
Alan Etlinger, New York Power Authority.
Hossein Hushair, New York Power Authority.
Ruby Chan, Central Hudson.
Anna Harpole, Central Hudson.
This is Forrest Small with Concentric Energy Advisors.
Peters Ward with Concentric Energy Advisors.
Marcus Quinn with Concentric Energy Advisors.
Go to the back row.
Mike Shares, St.
Chris Chang, NYSERDA.
Henry Drop-Con of Technology. Reed Wagner, Alliance for Clean Energy, New York.
Michelle Pepper, Guidehouse.
I'll just ask for those in the room to try to speak up as much as possible. Chris Schramm on the phone. How's our audio? Can you guys hear us all right on the phone?
Yeah, you guys, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to King from Con Edison.
All right, thanks, Jason. So King Look from Con Edison, chair of the ATWG. So welcome, everyone. This is the technical session for this year. Last year, when we last held this, is back in April 27th. That was the first one, and this being the second technical session. So just expand on some of the background that Jason presented. So this year, back in January, the commission issued an order accepting the July 2022 research plan and also the January 2023 progress report. But in that order, it also indicate that we need to modify to improve that research plan. And the modification really focus on expanding the tech scouting pipeline, right? So like Jason said, initially the ATWG will focus on three technology: energy storage, power flow control, and dynamic line reading. And to expand that pipeline, the commission ordered us to put out a call for concept papers, and which we did back in about a month ago. And today you'll hear a high-level summary of those concept papers received today. Also a little bit of information, ATWG, we do have a website. You just go to the Joint Utilities New York org, and just and there's a drop-down menu there. You can click on the ATWG, and there we put in things like input forms. If you need to contact us, there's an email address to contact us. We also put some relevant documents that we had posted on our website. So it's a great way to engage ATWG and also submit feedback. You don't have to wait for events like this to provide feedback. There is a email there as well to provide feedback. So moving on to the agenda, the next item.
Before we jump to that, I just wanted to mention that we are recording today's meeting, and the slides in those recordings will be posted on the DPS website underneath the case number 20E-0197. I think we'll also post slides to the JE website as well. So just wanted to mention that before we go any further.
So on this slide, you see the agenda itself. So the next items we will give you an update of the task force, that what we have done over the past year. And we'll also give you a summary and what is some of the resources available here in New York to help the ATWG itself. And then we'll give you a summary, high-level summary of the concept paper received today. And then we'll close today's session. So on the next slide. So on to kick off the summary of the task force, we have 3 task force. One, the energy storage, and we also have the dynamic line rating and also the power flow control. You see some of the different items, different phases. If you look at the very top, we lay out the technology scouting assessment process that was in that research plan. Basically consists of 3 phases: screening, assessment, and also looking at identify potential where to the deployment aspect itself. And all these technology, the task force, they will meet on a regular basis. Some that met like every 2 weeks, and some met like every 3 weeks itself. This on top of the ATWG meeting every month itself as well. Some of the aspects, they've gone through technology screening, barrier assessment where it's needed, looking at identify different use cases, and it's also tech potential study, and also develop these unified planning guideline itself. All the different groups have proceeded as right now. However, the power flow control one, just want to give you an idea. The power flow control, we look at various use cases, and what we found that we have pushed to the point that we can't go any further on at this time, but because I think the resource could be better allocated for like looking at more the energy storage and the other task force itself. Knowing that a lot of folks on these task forces are the same people as well. However, just the power flow task force itself, what we recognize, that group can also get redeployed as we learn more about these concept papers, what other technology we want to focus on. We can redeploy those resources to focus on other technology areas that we would, after our initial assessments of these concept papers. So more to come on that. So now I'd like to turn over to Chris Schramm, who's going to talk about the energy storage task force.
Thanks, King. Hi, I'm Chris Schramm. I work for NYSEG and Ardini, and I am the task force lead for now for the energy storage. And I'm just going to give a quick update for what we've been doing for the past year since the last tech conference. So just a high-level overview. The energy storage task force is focused on developing planning guidelines for the transmission, distribution, energy storage support to help meet CLCPA state goals, as well as support the coordinated grid planning process, or CGPP. Right now, I'm the lead, but starting next month, or this month, I guess, Jessica from Con Ed and Michael from National Grid are going to be taking on my role, and they will be giving the update, I assume, for the next tech conference. In 2024, we have 2 main activities that you might have seen on the previous slide there. The first of which, and they're being done in parallel, but the first of which is development of a unified planning guideline for energy storage. So this is going to be a guideline for all the New York State utilities to follow when they're deploying energy storage, specifically as a T&D energy resource. And then the second in parallel is the energy storage potential study. So this is a study that's going to be looking at where we can deploy energy storage today on each of our systems and what use cases are most applicable to help integrate renewables. So our high-level mission here for this energy storage task force is to help apply energy storage in support of New York's transmission and distribution system, facilitate better planning support for the coordinated grid planning process, and identify potential use cases that can help integrate renewables onto the grid. So actually, I think one of our focus right now is how we can implement storage on the transmission system. And that's because that's kind of going to be the main focus for the coordinated grid planning process. So we're looking at really large scale energy storage as part of that, but we're also not forgetting the distribution. So that's also going to be part of the Unified Planning Guideline. And then because of this Unified Planning Guideline is going to ensure consistent analysis of energy storage solutions across the joint utilities in New York. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to get into kind of a high level of what the Unified Planning Guideline has in it and what our kind of philosophy was when developing it. So as I mentioned, it's for the coordinated grid planning process, but it can also be used outside of that. But what we started with was we asked ourselves a set of questions on what we would need to do in order to have an equitable way to study energy storage within our system. So our first questions were around modeling. So we asked, how should energy storage resources be represented within the steady state power flow models that the utilities use today? We asked what types of energy storage resources might be modeled in coordinated grid planning process cases. Is that lithium-ion batteries? Is that, a different type of cell that has longer life? Is it pumped storage? Things like that, pumped hydro storage. And then our last question was what standard energy storage resource assumptions should planners check within the coordinated grid planning process cases? So that's things like charge and discharge profiles. What are the power factors that the energy storage needs to be set at? Things like that for different use cases. Once we thought of the modeling questions, we went and we looked at and we asked our questions around economic and cost assumptions. So these are not hard and fast rules. The economic and cost assumptions are really here for screening purposes, so we can compare an energy storage resource solution to a more traditional solution and screen out those instances where it's just not economical to use energy storage. But on the other end, where does it seem like energy storage might be a really good fit for this particular application when compared to a traditional solution? So we asked, what elements within a cost should be included for an energy storage solution within a planning study, if any? And then what is a reasonable estimate for different sizes of battery storage? And are there any other assumptions that are important for an economic analysis? This flow chart here on the left kind of shows our thought process for how we kind of started putting together this planning guideline. So our first step was to kind of look at the strategic planning objectives and what the scope is of the study. Once we developed those objectives, we said, are there any energy storage use cases that could help meet those? Then we asked those critical modeling questions. What types of resources could solve these energy storage use cases? And what planning tools are we specifically using to study the needs and constraints for the coordinated grid planning process? Once we had those modeling questions out of the way, we thought about the economic and cost assumptions for the screening tool. And hopefully that's all going to come together into a unified planning guideline that the state of New York will be able to point to and use frequently for our future analysis. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps for this UPG? Well, we kind of need actual input from the planners that are going to be performing the coordinated grid planning process. So we do have some involved today, but what we want to do is kind of socialize this out to both the ATWG greater group as well as the planners associated that are doing the coronary grid planning process to make sure we have buy-in from all parties. So our first plan here is to send out our guideline to the Greater Advanced Technology Working Group this month. We're going to get inputs from them and kind of revise it as needed from the ATWG. And then once the ATWG group is good with the guideline, we plan to send it to the planning team that's doing the coronary grid planning process and integrate their recommendations and changes. Hopefully that'll be around the June time period. And then by, our hope is July, but by July, we want to publicly post this unified planning guideline so it can be used in the coronary grid planning process stage 3, which is the development of solutions to integrate renewables onto the system. Prior to that public posting, we also want to maybe just provide the modeling recommendations to the consultant that's working on CGPP stage 2, which is the incorporation of the zonal model to the nodal model and developing the actual steady state models that the planners are going to use. And we just want to make sure that the way energy storage is modeled is going to be consistent with what's in the unified planning plan. All right, next slide, please. So our other parallel effort here is the energy storage potential study. So I think this was mentioned last year, but the energy storage potential study is basically looking to determine the potential for energy storage to support New York's T&D systems as we meet the CLCPA electrification and renewable energy goals. So we basically broke this study into 4 tasks. The first is to characterize the landscape of energy storage and what's been done in the country and in the world, and how we can take those use cases and modeling assumptions and apply them to New York State to meet our energy goals and electrification goals. That task is complete, and we've moved on to task 2 now, where we're developing, or DNV is developing, a formalized economic framework for assessing the economics of the different use cases that we identified as the best use cases for our state. And then once task 2 is complete, which should be around June, July period, we're actually going to sit down with that framework and apply it to each utility's unique system and come up with a actual potential number for how much energy storage could be used to resolve different needs on our systems. And then finally, we're going to prepare a report with recommendations, as well as like a high-level idea of the costs and how much savings we could make, or we could have with implementing this energy storage. So down here is a couple of use cases for what we're actually looking at within this potential study. Some of these actually overlap quite a lot. But one of the main use cases is infrastructure investment deferral. We're also looking at using energy storage for distribution system resiliency and reliability. So that's preventing customers from seeing outages, things like that. Also improving DER hosting capacity on the distribution system and helping with electrification and load growth, as well as EV charging infrastructure that's going to start being built out significantly within our system. On the transmission side, we're also looking at transmission level renewables hosting capacity. So that's typically siting energy storage with renewables on the transmission system. And then also sort of in the same vein is transmission system congestion relief. And then finally, how can we use mobile and temporary energy storage for different applications, whether that's resiliency and reliability, or using for operational purposes. So if we have to rebuild a line, can we use energy storage that easier and be able to take an outage for longer and things like that. So that concludes my update here. guess I would be looking to take questions if there's any. Thank you.
Any questions for Chris in the room? Seeing none, Forrest,
I
anything?
don't see any online.
Nothing online?
Maybe I can ask a question. Just quick question. Chris, this is Fuad Dagger from National Grid. How does this study, especially on the economic section of it, of the assessment, capture the cybersecurity? Is that envisioned to be part of that work? You know, this is eventually will be a critical infrastructure. So how does the economics of that are going to be evaluated? And maybe that's a little early in the discussion, but I just want to see if that has been envisioned and talked about. And then maybe the second question is the alignment of this work with the proposed energy storage roadmap that was issued by DPS and by NYSERDA. And we were waiting for an order on that. So I just want to see if there's any comments on that.
So the question on the cybersecurity, I'm not entirely sure about. I believe that that is one of the components that gets included within the economic costs. The same way cybersecurity would be included in a more traditional solutions costs. I can't speak to that anymore, to be completely honest with you. I don't know if someone else in the room can answer that question. As far as the energy storage roadmap is concerned, that is actually one of the inputs that has been in task 1 and somewhat in task 2, looking at the landscape of energy storage today and how we can take existing analyses and studies and feed that into our potential study.
Thanks, Chris.
And Jason, we did get one question that came through. Is, will the study that's being done as part of this task 1 be made public?
I'm assuming we will have a public version of the study that will be posted on our ATWG website. And I think I can answer Fuad's question too, if you want me to also. You want me to?
Please.
All right. In the study, it's utility ownership of T&D assets. So the potential of that. So if you look at that, that becomes another piece of equipment for you that you could potentially have in your system that will operate, right? So how you handle the cybersecurity will probably be no different than you would handle cybersecurity with a DLR project or some other thing that we're working on also. The tie-in to the New York State study that NYSERDA published on the roadmap, there is a nice paragraph, and I think somebody shared it at our last meeting of, we will let the ATWG Energy Storage Task Force look into energy storage and see what the potential is for T&D applications and the impacts of that has on the goal of meeting the 3 or 6 gigawatt targets in the state. So there's a whole paragraph that's spelled out early in and the support of DPS and others in that effort and folks like Best. So hopefully that answered your question on a couple of those things there.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the answers.
I have a question. Chris, could you speak to the difference between the energy storage potential study and the UPG? Does one beget the other? One feed into the other?
So they were started in parallel efforts. I think the UPG is more focused on this is a planning guideline that we can give to the coordinated grid planning process planners to actually perform their analyses in the same manner. But we do envision there being some potential overlap where we might feed in some of these economic, the economic framework that's being developed within the potential study that could feed into the UPG as like a screening tool to see if it's economical for a particular use case for a particular size of storage. So that's sort of where we're seeing some overlap, but they are in some ways. Yep.
Chris, if
think I-
if I can add to the response, Nick, we had two different objectives we went out on these things. The potential study was really trying to help us see, what is the potential application for storage for T&D applications? That's a really important question. So that's kind of often going, and that looks at value and cost. The UPG is really designed to help a planning engineer figure out what kind of a grid need is best suited to maybe a storage solution as it compares to a traditional solution. And we will look at cost for the simple purpose of saying, is this in the ballpark? If I have a grid need that requires a certain capability, would storage be a viable option for that? Because there's going to be so many of those that are going to be needed. Chris has often characterized this as more of a screening. The analysis that any planner does could go much deeper. But the idea behind the planning guide was to say, let's look at some grid needs. Is storage a viable option? Under what conditions might it be? And by the way, here's some rough numbers that a planner could use to kind of do that calculus as they screen. And I suspect over time, they will complement each other. And the information we get from the potential study will definitely be valuable into a future iteration of the UPG, and maybe even vice versa. But we really started out with two separate objectives.
Then recognizing the UPG is effectively a screening tool, is there like granular considerations for the economics, such as kind of like designing for extreme weather and storm hardening, right? Maybe different down along, maybe upstate. And is that like incorporated already, or is that kind of a follow-up? After the screening, that's a consideration later?
Great question. So one of the very first things the ESTF did was develop use cases for, when we say a T&D application for storage, what did we mean? One of the use cases dealt with reliability. Other use cases dealt with referral. We even considered some of the market applications, but we didn't go very far down there because we were focused on grid needs. Having said that, the use case concepts will be in the potential study. We don't really look specifically at use cases in the UPG. We just simply say, if there's a grid need that's identified by a planner, then they might consider using storage. And here's the way you might want to model it. So you can use it in your analysis. Here's some of the rough costs you might consider. But we didn't actually get into specifying the use case because we knew that was being done elsewhere.
Thanks, Forrest. That's helpful.
Anything else before we move on?
I guess just to add to that, Forrest has been leading a lot of the pulling together in the task force this work, and it's a real very difficult balancing act of balancing between trying to come up with general ideas, screening tools, general solutions, and specific solutions. And I think your point that you're making is got to be borne in mind is that all of these are going to be general solutions, directional guidance. But, I think everyone recognizes the need for specific studies for specific use cases. And that is these will not be all the same by any means. And I think everyone recognizes that in the discussion.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, that's exactly what's on my mind too. And recognizing it needs to be iterative, right? You can't just get to an immediate definitive solution right out of the gate.
Right.
You need to get, first level screening and then go from there. That is helpful as to where the more granular, let's say, look.
To add to that point, Nick, I'll speak to it in a little bit. We're doing some deep dives with specific utilities to kind of figure out what in their territory makes sense from a deep dive standpoint to figure out how energy storage can be utilized as a T&D asset. And I'll speak to one of those examples coming up soon.
Yeah. Okay, so we got one more question from the chat.
Okay.
And this question is phase 2 of the DNV study about.
Say what?
Potential study. What's phase 2 of the potential study about?
Phase 2.
I think you're referring to the last section here, the study is entering phase 2. I believe that should say task 2.
Yeah.
And we're actually deep within task 2 right now. And that's developing the economic framework for the different use cases that we've identified below here.
PLR.
Hi, my name is Ruby Chan. I work for Central Hudson. The mission of the DLR task force is to identify and reduce the barriers to deploying DLR and to unbottle renewable generation to meet New York statewide CLCPA policy goals. The 2024 goals are to assess technical potential of DLR to increase capacity of transmission in New York and to develop a DLR guide for planners. Next slide, please. Over the last year, we spent some time looking at barriers assessment. So we evaluated barriers to identify any key constraints or development issues for DLR. And we also assessed ability to proceed with technical and economic assessments. And the outcome of that is to sponsor a DLR potential study and to develop a DLR guide for planners. It's very similar to the Energy Storage Task Force. And then for the last half of the year, we spent some time looking at the use case development. We developed a use case that considers the grid needs, functional characteristics, interconnections, benefits, and responsibilities of the relevant parties, and then we considered multiple options and confirmed a primary use case for transmission system. So the outcome use case was the DLR for transmission system. So that's what we're going to focus on. Next slide, please. So for the DLR potential study, there's an RFP that just went out today through the NYSERDA mini bid framework to a short list of contractors. And the RFP will be leveraged ongoing demonstration projects with New York utilities. And the RFP will leverage the use case developed by the DLR task force. So there's 4 tasks for the DLR potential study. The first task is to assess the scope of the DLR use case implementation in the United States and abroad. Task 2 is to develop an economic framework that utilities can use to evaluate DLR use cases. The third task is to assess the potential for DLR on all types of transmission lines in operation across utilities. And then task 4 is to develop a final report summarizing the results from the first 3 tasks. And then the timeline is we just issued the RFP today. The contract will be selected in Q3 of this year, and the study will be completed by first quarter of 2025, and we should have a report out by second quarter of 2025. Next slide, please. We're also going to develop in parallel a DLR guide similar to energy storage, and it's going to facilitate planning support for the CGPP, clarify any planning study questions involving the DLR technologies, and then kind of create a quick, consistent review between DLR and traditional solutions, and then develop standardized economic analysis of DLR solutions. And some of the methodologies include DLR solutions in the transmission planning study model, examine the suitability of DLR solutions for addressing grid needs, and apply basic economic and cost assumptions to analyze DLR in a transmission analysis. So this is going to be developed in parallel, so we're hoping to have a DLR guide by the end of the year. Any questions?
You mentioned developing an economic framework for U.S. and abroad. I was just curious, is work abroad going to be used to help define the economic model for the U.S.? And then how local are you thinking as well? I know within New York State, is DLR different within New York State than across the
We're going to look at internationally as well, but the economics behind it, if we define like cost benefit or something from international, we might bring it back to New York if it applies, but locally it'll be New York State.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's more, if you're seeing more, DLR implementation abroad, if that was kind of motivating that comment. That was.
Yeah. So let me ask that. So we are dealing with international companies who've got DLR technology.
I see.
So we're looking, not stopping at the border, we're going overseas to look at that.
Look at their technology to potentially bring it here.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any more questions in the room?
Actually, one more question. So as far as the timing of that, you plan to have a study by the end of the year. Would DLR be then considered in the first round of the
CDBG,
yeah, I mean, how does that timing work? It seems like the study's at the end of the year. It's going to be a little late to get into the stage 4 solution, stage 3, stage 4 solutions. What are you thinking on that?
Yeah, when this but during the CDP process, the plans are gonna consider the DLR in parallel to it. While we're still working on the planning guideline.
Okay, so you have enough information that you don't need the planning guideline to actually evaluate the projects.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Chris Schramm. Stage 3 is where the input would be for the solutions, and that does not end until July of 2025 with the current guidelines. So if it's completed by the end of the year, we still have half of the allocated time for the solution development in there.
And I think as we move along these studies, like we did with the energy storage, we're not waiting for the final report to tell everybody what the impacts are. We're feeding that into the group, and we're modifying our results and feeding them into our efforts that are going on parallel. Same with some demonstration projects I'll talk about in a few seconds here too.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Ruby, thanks for your presentation. Maybe the question is, Mike, on the information. I mean, there's quite a bit of these technologies that could overlap, and there would be some, overlapping on the technologies. How do they interact with each other? Like, we're looking at DLR, and we're looking at power control, and we're looking at energy storage. Where is that line of intersection, and how do we account for that? Is that someplace later, or is this being considered now?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all for part of the research, right? We have these 3 pieces of equipment, potentially, how can they impact us increasing renewables, right? So we're in our studies, we're trying to figure that all out. All right. If you kind of look at DLR is really a function of wind speed and how can we either simulate it or measure it and figure out what the line rating is, because in the formula of line rating is wind speed along with ambient temperature, right? So those 2 are going on with both the FERC Order 881. When it comes to energy storage, it has different use cases in figuring out what can it do maybe to increase or provide extra, remove congestion or extra hosting capacity. So if you look at DLR is typically a technology that's just for one line, and it can improve that one line's throughput. When you come to power flow control devices, kind of think of those as valves in the system, right? And we're doing a lot of research on that. So that allows you to think about how can I flow more power through the whole system instead of path of least resistance, typically how power flows. So can you put impedance in a line and help restrict this line a little bit so we can move more power through that line? So power flow controls become a device that's utilized to impact flow through the whole system, or more parts of the system than a specific line. And then energy storage might have its own impacts in those same type of areas, but just doing it differently by taking load and absorbing it and then releasing that, or generation, I should say, one or the other, and doing that to help support a line. So all of these kind of connect with each other.
So I just want to add to the energy storage. Energy storage, I think of something that you need to park renewable energy that otherwise could be curtailed, right?
Right.
So it's a much more direct application in that regard. Like the other one, like the power flow control, you need to look for alternate path. Or the alternate path not being used because the natural impedance of the system prevents that from happening. So that becomes a little more complicated. So all those factors get weighed in as we begin to look at all these technologies.
The other piece is on DLRs.
Yeah.
One technology is not going to give you all the information. You need a combination of, in some cases, 2, maybe even 3 technologies to give you all the variables. So it's not one stop to decide everything.
No, I'm looking at it as that we're doing DLR, power control, energy storage, and they're all for basically the same kind of approach or reason at the end of the day. are they all integrated? Can they be integrated? Can we look at how we integrate all these together?
They need to be, they need to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, at the end of the day, and we'll talk about it in a second, but we have a tool that we could potentially do this modeling and understanding of what we need to do, when we need to do it, and how do we need to size it. So, yeah.
Awesome.
This is a new planning process, right?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Question.
A question in the back?
Yeah, how are you guys working with like the federal agencies? I think like Grid Technologies Office is, certainly open to working with, state agencies on, because they're already conducting a lot of this research as well. So, how are you guys working with federal? Sorry, this is rewriting so much for people.
The question for
You
Mike.
want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, it's funny how you say that. I got the GETS report from DO here, sitting right here. We've been tied in with the federal efforts almost since day one. And if you kind of look at what they're doing, we're trying to learn from them. And if actually you read some of the reports, they're actually extracting information from us. You see a lot of things when they talk about GETS, we already knee deep into it. But the way we kind of handle it in NYSERDA, and hopefully do it in the state, is typically when you work with DOE and ARPA-E, right, they deal with technology readiness levels of like 1 to 5, right? So they go from basic research and they're kind of getting things to applied research. Us as a state, we tried to take it from 5 to 9. So we try to take that research and apply it to a solution that could be commercially available and provide that answer in New York State. So hopefully that's where the window is. So it's sort of like our research is not on a basic research or even getting things to a borderline commercialization. It's how do we take that research and drive it to commercialization and apply it in the state? Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. We can't have too much overlap there, because we're not a basic research organization. We're an applied research organization. So yes, we all need to learn from each other. And as we go up that technology change curve that the utility industry is going on now, it's happening faster than sooner. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Anything else?
I got one question.
Okay, go ahead.
CGPT is supposed to identify preliminary solutions by Q1 2025. How would that work with the timeline of the potential study for DLR? And I think that was similar to Bill's question you asked.
Yeah. We're going to work on it in parallel. We know enough about DLR to apply it now, and we're still put it into a formal document.
Okay. We'll move on to the next segment. That's you, Mike.
Oh, I guess get to talk again. All right. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to start off real quick. I'll give you an update of what NYSERDA is doing and what we're doing to help support ATWG or ITWG and other efforts in the state. So next slide, Jason. Quick background. We created the program in 2006-07 timeframe, and we have awarded over 230 projects. It's our grid modernization, i.e. smart grid R&D program. These are some of the efforts we have done. We have about 50 active projects now. So I'm going to speak to a few of those in a second here. One of the new ones is under the transmission system. We'll talk about some stability inertia projects we got going on with ISO and a new company. We'll get into that. Next slide, Jason. So here's an example of some. Here's examples of things we've done in the past. So if anybody's interested, let us know. And the DER integration work has been support for ITWG, which is very near and dear to Jason's heart. So there's some of the research work there. So we continue to support both of these organizations and then some. So on to the next slide. So there's a little background. So our approach has been to, we've had like a two-pronged approach for many years throughout SBC 3, SBC 4, and now CEF 1, where we would either put out what we call open solicitations or dedicated targeted solicitations. And essentially, in a nutshell, that has been open solicitations have been targeting problem areas where we don't fully know the problem statement. And targeted solicitations are around typically when we know a problem statement and we kind of work with a specific utility on solving that problem. So it's kind of been a two-pronged approach, and it's been so far so good, we think, from a standpoint. We're always looking to get better, so any input you can give us would be great. So just when we had launched our ATWG effort, obviously the big three were DLR, PFC, and energy storage. So in our PON 4393 round 4 we put out, we focused on those technologies along with others. So in that, we awarded a bunch of projects end of year last year, and we're contracting with all of them now, and they're almost all done. So we had some work around power flow control devices. We definitely have some energy storage work going on. I'll speak to them. We'll talk about some other situational awareness tools that we're developing. We have a project around advanced conductors, which might be the future. We got projects around DERMS and other offshore wind analysis and impacts. Next slide, Jason. So that's been our approach. So let's talk about dynamic line rating, because this is not, you know, even though we have a potential study going on, we're hoping that these demonstration projects have fed into the group and will continue to feed into the group. So I don't have it up here now, but we did a dynamic line rating project with NYPA to just test out the sensors, and it happened to be with WindSim and Line Vision. So we saw great success with that in the North Country. We saw some nice results, and NYPA's off and running with that. Meanwhile, we created a dynamic line rating challenge with Avangrid, okay? And that is, Chris is close to that. That's looking at how can we utilize both those two technology areas that we ended up winning to help improve ratings of some lines out in the Hornell-ish area. And then we just recently awarded a dynamic line rating project to Con Ed and EPRI to look at other vendors, and that includes Ampassanon and Prisma Photonics. So stay tuned for the results of that. And what we're hoping is that these projects, along with the work with NYPA and everything, have already been fed into the DLR task force. They will also feed into our potential studies. So not only can we determine what's the best sensor for the situation, and all of them have different secret sauces, I guess, for a better term. Also, how do we operationalize those? There is a cybersecurity issue that's covered in one of our projects with Avangrid. In fact, that was one of a big challenge. So those are, how do we bring those into the back office calculations and operations of going from static ratings or seasonal ratings to hourly ratings, like has been mandated with FERC Order 881. Now, my understanding in the state now is that initially FERC Order 881 was supposed to be deployed to July of next year. It has been delayed to July of 2028, 3 years. So we're going to figure out how our dynamic line rating work fits into the ambient air temperature work that needs to happen with that, because some of the big challenges are around getting to hourly profiles in both the TOs and the ISOs and working off of them. So hopefully our not only will our dynamic line rating work help in the grid coordinating planning process, but will also help with us as we go down and meet some of these FERC orders, because they also have a docket on potentially DLR becoming a mandate and potentially. So next slide, Jason. So that's DLR. So now we focused on energy storage. And obviously, Chris did a great job of talking about what the potential study was planning to do, because that was at a high level. So we awarded Con Ed a deep dive. So we're doing a deep dive project with Con Ed and EPRI, and to figure out, okay, how can we now use that type of analysis work in their 60-ish plus networks to figure out what makes sense for energy storage for them. So that work is going on, and that's coordinating right into the work with the Energy Storage Task Force. Hopefully in the not too distant future, I owe my buddy Petey some work over there in doing a deep dive in Central Hudson to figure out. So hopefully, Nick, we can start thinking about how can we do deep dives in specific utility territories that make sense for them, but also can be shared amongst all of us, because we might have a similar situation amongst us. We know Con Ed with the underground network can be a little bit different. Next slide, Jason. That's on energy storage. The other thing that we've been hot on, and I think it's something we might want to think about in the future, is DERMS. We have wrapping up a DERMS project with Central Hudson, and just awarded a new DERMS project with Avangrid. And we think between all of the DSIP work and that coming to, and FERC Order 222 coming down the pike from a market standpoint, that these algorithms that need to be built for either how they're going to operate in ADMS systems or operate in the field need to start becoming determined. And I think maybe in the future here, there might be some use cases we might want to think about as a team. So that's DERMS. We also have a DERMS project going on with Orange and Rockland too. So I can only talk about so many. Next slide, Jason. So I'll give you an update on some other award winners that we're working on. And one of them is this Reactive Technologies, a stability measurement device that we're putting out throughout the entire state. We're going to bring that information into our partner ISO here and at Agile Lab, because people are very concerned about the level of inverter-based resources and its impact on the stability of the system. And what did the Lord Kelvin once say? If you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So we're hoping that these stability measurement devices can be utilized to help us monitor stability of the system as we move down this spectrum of this renewable energy deployment. So stay tuned for that. That work is going on now. ISO has been a big partner with it. We're going to house a lot of the data at the Agile Lab. So anybody wants to do research can start looking at the impacts of renewables on stability. There was a topic under advanced conductors. So now we're doing a superconductor with this company called VEER, Superconductor Product Development. So there's a lot of work going on there. Hopefully we'll be able to, get a site, hopefully maybe down at Brookhaven, who knows, to help us figure out how this new type of superconductor can aid us in our efforts here. So advanced conductors, it might be something in the future we might think about as a team. Next slide, Jason. We've been working with a company called SwitchSource. So SwitchSource has pretty much two devices. They have what they call a tie controller, which is sort of like a power flow control device. And we've got some history with that and work with that. We've shared that with the PSC task force, and they have all of that, those reports and the knowledge from that. They have another little more unique device called the Phase EQ, which is more of like an energy efficiency phase balancing device, which has shown promise. So we're doing a demo project with National Grid on that. We had a successful one with one of our munis, moving that to the next level. And last but not least, Utilidata, which is, for a better term, a local DERMS kind of solution instead of a central DERMS. We're doing a project with that in one of our municipalities, so we show them some support too. Next slide, Jason. So that's it. That's a high level of what we've done in our smart grid grid research program. We also have a long duration energy storage program, just as an FYI. These are some of the technologies that we're looking at with them. This is Scott Egbert, Scott Larson's program in our group. Next slide, Jason. So we have a couple projects with them. We're a project with Constellation that's looking at that. Energy storage, different type, long duration. We got hydrogen projects. There's been a lot of work in that group around how do we use hydrogen as an energy storage device. Next slide, Jason. Also with 212 Solar and Zinc 8. And I know you folks at NYPA are very close to that. So as we go down this energy storage path, anything we get in our other organizations when it comes from a research standpoint, I will share with our teams, and we post them on our websites, and hopefully there'll be knowledge that can be transferred amongst all of our groups. And next slide, Jason. So last but not least, we'll talk about what we're looking to do to support both the state and our ATWG and IT groups in the future. We want to continue to work with everybody and making that happen. Right now, we have a new PON 5354 round 2 going out. This is an EV to grid effort. So that's coming down the pike. That should be out actually any day now. My partner, Chris, is working with Con Ed, Simon and Constantine on a Con Ed challenge. That's one of our targeted deep dives, looking into some type of new, I guess, I don't know, microgrid control device. I'm not sure what it could be called. Just as an FYI for folks, there is some DOE funding that we are putting in front of our municipalities for technical assistance. And, NYPA has been working with us on that. So FYI, it's PON 5737 that's out. Scott Larson and the long duration energy storage team is having a PON 5759 coming out the end of this month. And then last but not least, when we as a team figure out what technology areas we want to focus on, NYSERDA is planning on getting another PON out like we did with 4393 round 4 and seeing what it can do for the marketplace to start stimulating ideas for those new technology areas. And then supporting of our folks at Agile Lab, we have some research work going on there with Quanta on protection and National Grid and the impacts of inverter-based resources on protection. That's going to be a unique challenge that's coming down the pike, folks. So something to think about. And we're modeling, we did some work with Clarkson, it's housed at the lab, of modeling the 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. We worked with Ørsted and Equinor, getting those generator models and everything there. We're going to also try to model the 320 kV DC mesh that could potentially be proposed out there. So you could take into account not only the modeling of the inverter-based generation, but the inverter-based DC supply for that. So hopefully there'll be tools that will allow us to do some future analysis work. So that's it from NYSERDA's perspective. Any question?
Let me just add onto that. So we're also, in addition to NYSERDA, we're also working with the DOE. We've got a grant for a couple $1 million to look at alternatives to lithium-ion, long-range energy storage. And we've got a second DOE grant that's been submitted. It's an evaluation by the DOE. So we're looking at other technologies. And I just want to add something to what Mike talked about on DLRs. It's not only the sensor technology. What we found is that local weather readings are key in order to get accurate DLR information. And as we found out, not all local weather stations are created the same. Mm-hmm. And so we've gone through that. We've used various vendors and think we have a solution there too. So there's a combination. It's not one solution that's going to go to a candy store and pick up a bag of candy. It's a lot of combination, a lot of research involved.
Yeah, I provide some links to information for people if they're interested or not. Look at me, but look me up. And to add to that too, because power flow controllers are a device that we are starting to model in the lab to see what's the impacts of those electronics. We have a smart wire system down going in at Central Hudson. It's getting probably almost done already, right? Yeah. For you guys. So the impacts of those power electronic devices on the grid and how it can be utilized to help us in this area. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. Stay tuned. Thanks. Any questions?
I guess I've got a question, and I guess I just realized for people online, we probably should identify ourselves. I'm Bill Acker from New York Best. The question for you, Mike, and a comment actually. So the question is actually around, you talked about the grid stability work that you're doing. One of the things that's come up last year in the state was around fault sensing, and the fact that the way the grid right now for a lot of utilities fault sense is somewhat incompatible with modern inverter-based resources, and you can take the approach of imitate the old equipment, or you can take the approach of changing the fault sensing. And in New York Best, we've argued that we really should start thinking about changing the fault sensing. And so I'm wondering about your grid stability work is looking into any of the, or considering a future project around the fault sensing pieces.
Protection is going to be a big issue, and I would have my buddy Henry over there start speaking to that. It's stability. You got to be careful what you're talking about when you talk about stability, because you got two different things. You got voltage stability, right? That's meaning, they got frequency stability. Those are all different things. But when you start talking about protection and you start talking about the difference between an inverter-based resources and a rotating machine, which has 6 times fault current typically, you start talking about how relays pick up and how relays are sequenced between the end of the line and the beginning. So you want something to trip down there, not all the way back here. And Henry, do you want me to start scaring people? And Jason's living through this, and National Grid is on this team. What you don't see, and trust me, the relay vendors know this. The algorithms that they have built in their relays, be it all of the vendors, Schweitzer, GE, and Siemens, which are working on our project, there's a difference between how those algorithms work with rotating machines and seeing that initial spike that happens when you have a synchronous machine versus an inverter-based resource, which really it's a one-to-one. You don't really see a spike. So now you got to ask yourself a question: is that a trip, or is that just a high load?
Yep.
And so the vendors of these equipment are really. That's why they shared with us 3 relays that we're putting at the lab and working with Henry to figure out the algorithms that need to be built in the new relay packages might need to be totally different than what's out there today. And this is a unique challenge that could really be a showstopper as we've learned in National Grid territory out west. So these are some of the things that we hope that we stay on the research. We try to get out in front way ahead so we can start getting solutions there. We talk about stability, and we can go on all day about that, because as we discussed, that technology change curve we're going up is rapid. And and then whether it's offshore wind and we need to put, synchronous condensers in, and all those things need to be analyzed, and we're in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more that, the fact that inverters don't put out negative sequence current, you're relying on that is a problem. And the answer isn't just make the old issues happen on the grid. I mean, that's a little like saying I'm going to detect car traffic by emissions from my IC engines, and when electric cars come out there, I don't have emissions. So you've got to change how we detect, right? And I think this is critical.
I agree. I mean, if anybody doesn't think how we operate, plan, protect, and we go on the grid, if we want to meet those renewable initiatives, need to understand that everything potentially could change in how we do all of that stuff. So it's something over 100 years that hasn't changed, that might change immensely over the next 10 plus.
Yep. Well, I'm glad you're focusing.
Well,
on that.
we're trying to. Yeah.
So my other comment to it was the point made was I was very happy to hear about year long duration. Or not hear about saying about it, but you talk about year long duration storage work. And I think an important point for the ATWG here is that we in the next iteration, we're not ready this iteration. But in the next iteration of planning cycle, we have to start thinking about how we expand our energy storage work to go to longer durations. Because obviously there are times where the grid solutions, the longer durations are exceptionally important. And so we have a real opportunity. And so we've got a lot of work right now to incorporate lithium-ion batteries on, and we're doing a great job on that. We now, in the next iteration, probably have to start thinking of layering on the long duration.
Yeah, I think, what I try to do is be a conduit to all of our research programs. So we have hydrogen, we have buildings, we have that. And hopefully, if we see things there, I can bring them to our group to make sure that that knowledge is being transferred.
The biggest challenge right now is round trip efficiency for long-term energy storage.
Yep.
Most of them are at the 50% or below.
Yep.
Which means you're paying $2 for a dollar.
Well, yeah, that's kind of things we wanted to add to the unified planning guidelines. So when people make that decision, they understand what the economics are.
Yeah. And that's exactly why, I think we argue, and I think you recognize, Alan, we need a portfolio because you don't want those to be running all the time. You want those to be running when they need to run. And then you want the lithium-ion to be running all the time. It's high efficiency.
Yeah.
So Mike, so I'll follow Bill, Amy Marshall, Arctic National Lab. So relevant to Fund 5737, the technical assistance funding. How do we identify municipalities and co-ops that are looking for assistance? Because I can envision, next to like Brookhaven could be of help. But I didn't know, are they contacting you?
Yeah, so the Power Authority, almost all the municipalities in New York State are our customers. Brookhaven is a customer of ours. We have what we call key account managers who are dealing with municipalities and the national labs that are in New York State, 24 hours a day. So we get their feedback, we have meetings with them, understand what their pain points are, and then we'll translate that and bring that back to Mike or whoever.
Yeah, this is a DOE award that came through the GRIPS, which was it wasn't something you had to apply for, but every state got it. I forget what they call that grant. And it has to be used at municipalities for technical assistance. I think I wrote it up there. So that is coordinated with NYPA and that whole red lease, and it's helping them find technical assistance to determine, where they can improve resiliency and reliability in their territory. So it's just kind of mostly study initially, because I think it's only like $200K-ish. But then after that, then obviously they'll want to deploy, they'll want to potentially put in for whatever rate cases they think will make sense for them from a reliability, resiliency standpoint.
Yeah, they're looking for technical assistance for
exactly, and that's what that whole program is, and it has been coordinated with NYPA, and yeah.
And they're also looking for cheap hydropower. So.
That's a whole other story. That answer your question? Yeah. No problem.
Any other questions for Mike?
I had one question come in just as we were making the transition, and this might be one that we need to respond to as a group. But the question is, beyond planning studies, which may be limited to stressed or worst case simulations, how do you evaluate the operational benefits of these technologies? And we had just finished talking about storage and DLR and some other things. I think one way to respond to that would be when we start within our task forces, we've been looking at use cases early to try to define what we're looking at. Use the use cases to feed into the potential studies. And it said, I think in the potential studies where we're going to begin looking at some of these benefits, how we pass benefits through to planning guides, we haven't dealt with that yet. But that's my thought on answering the question.
Any questions on operational benefits?
Yes.
I would envision that, I think as part of the CGPP, you got to correct me if I'm not, but one of the analysis, I believe, is the least cost study itself. You have to go through the whole exercise, but I believe they do also production cost studies as well, modeling. I'm not sure about that area. But if you go through the whole exercise, you run through the 87, 60 hours, you do begin to assess what point of the year, how the system operate relative to a reference case, for example, right? So you can see any improvement in that regard.
I will say production cost is being considered, but it's not innately incorporated into the CGP as it stands.
Okay.
And I think Bill Ackern, best again. As far as that question might be getting a little bit to some of the nuances of comparing a transmission solution to an energy storage solution, in the CGP process, and having the energy storage solution have other benefits that are not necessarily monetarily considered in the process, right? So you talk about renewable curtailment that will be considered to some extent, but how it's exactly considered, where and other pieces, reliability, resiliency, all other types of pieces that could be done there. And so I think that I think you guys are starting to figure out how you're going to be doing that, but it seems to me that that's probably still a bit of a work in progress here of how that's happening. And I don't know if you guys want to add more texture to that. I know in the discussions in the Energy Storage Task Force subgroup, these conversations have been coming up, and you've been working some of it into the planning guide, some of the considerations. I don't know from the ATWG higher level whether how that's kind of be worked in, but there probably will be some sets of pieces where it will act slightly differently, and there'll be some benefits with it acting slightly differently.
This is why they're against National Grid, and I think I would add to what Bill just said. There's also policy, and how do you put a value on the policy, achieving public policies? Those are not easily monetized or captured, but they are important. We need to do these technologies part of the policy. That is a challenge that the ATWG probably may want to consider look at how that's going.
Any other questions? Put on the phone for us. Okay. All right. So I gotta keep going here, Mike.
Hussein. Yeah, that's me. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is Hussein Bashir, Director of the Agile Lab. This is going to be a status update on the Agile Lab, but I'm going to start with a couple of slides introducing Agile, what's the role of Agile for those folks who haven't seen the past presentations. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So Agile, or Advanced Grid Innovation Laboratory for Energy, was established to accelerate the adoption of new technologies. So Agile is not an engineering firm, it's not a research institute, but it's a testing facility where we develop and maintain a platform that we can evaluate and analyze the future grid. We also have tools to prototype solutions that come out of research and development. And more importantly, we have a platform that can be leveraged to safely and realistically test new technologies, either coming out of R&D prototype or maybe already commercialized by vendors. And there are four main components to this platform. If we go to the next slide. We don't need to go through all the names here in this slide, but I'll start from the bottom. So there are some hardware devices that allows us to create this platform, like mock-up of substations or amplifiers that allows us to interconnect simulators with the technologies under test. Second level simulators are basically supercomputers that virtualize the power grid. and they're computationally very strong to the level that we can run the simulations in real time. The third level are applications, basically software platforms that can be used to model the grid. And the last one, which to me is the most important one, is the New York State grid models that we created over the past few years. So we were fortunate to be able to create these models, very accurate EMT, electromagnetic transient models for the full transmission 5,000 bus model. So basically anything from 765 kV down to 34.5 kV is included in these models. We even have gone down to distribution in some areas, but of course this is an ongoing work because there are a lot of bus and distribution systems. That includes the power electronic-based devices, renewable energy resources like the 9 gigawatt offshore wind that Mike mentioned. And together, all these four components basically allow us to do grid simulation and modeling, to do grid analysis. It allows us to do real-time hardware and software in the loop simulation, basically a tool that allows us to test the technologies by interfacing them with the virtualized grid. Communication network emulation, I forgot to say that we've developed models for substation level communication as well as control room to control room as well. So this way we can create cyber events, cyber attacks, and see how, for example, intrusion detection systems will react. Economic analysis, application development, hardware testing are the tools that basically allow us to prototype solutions. I will give you some more examples of the projects to give you ideas in the next slides. But we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. But how are we related to the ATWG process? So looking at the technology scouting and assessment, there are 3 stages, and we belong mainly to stage number 2, where the technologies are shortlisted already. They come to the lab for the economic and technical assessment. We do contribute to stage 3 as well, because when we test the technologies, they are not tested in isolation. They are connected to the grid model, so there's attributes of location when we test these technologies. So we do contribute to number 3 as well. Some quick updates about the lab in the next slide. For those of you, we'll go to the next. Thank you. For those of you who didn't know or who don't know Agile, we used to be in White Plains, but recently, October last year, actually, we moved to Albany, to our new place, to into a bigger facility. We've had some construction going on. Good news is that's almost finished. The grand opening is scheduled for May 29th. So we will be happy to have the next gathering of this group in our location. It's a 10,000 square feet testing facility, and it's envisioned to be a one-stop shop for all New York State, New York grid stakeholders. You can come to Agile, you can see different technologies, how they're performing the grid, maybe which one is better than the other one, so all in one place. The next update is, we can go to the next slide, is an initiative we kickstarted last year, is creating a comprehensive digital twin of the New York State grid, which is the work that we're building on top of the models that we had already created for the New York State grid. Since this might be a new topic to some of the folks, I thought it's good to expand a little bit. So a digital twin, by definition, is a virtual representation of an object or system, in our case, the power grid, obviously, that spans its entire life cycle. And the key important thing is that it's updated from real-time data. Typically, the current practice is that when we create models, no matter how accurate the model is, it's in isolation. It's not really connected to the actual grid. But here with the digital twin, we make this connection. So in some sense, the model becomes live because it has some sense of what's going on in the grid right now. And it uses simulation, machine learning, and reasoning to help decision-making. Digital twins are typically classified based on their level of complexity. So in this picture, you see from the top left, the simplest digital twin is a descriptive digital twin that simply shows some measured signal. It provides some controls. The next level is informative digital twin that not only shows the measured signals, but also derives some information out of the measured signals. The next level is predictive digital twin, which is an informative digital twin, but this time it looks into some futuristic insights about the system it's representing. And the last one, which is the most complicated one, the comprehensive transformative digital twin, and this is a type we're trying to create for the New York State grid, is a digital twin that not only take advantages of measurements, but also it has very accurate models of the system. So if one state of the system is perturbed, you can see how the other parts of the system, the other states of the system will react. So it has advantage that it takes information from both data, measured signals, as well as the actual models. There are many use cases to digital twins. The first one, which is very important to us, is realistic testing of technologies. Basically, it means that when you interface a piece of technology, no matter it's a software, it's a piece of hardware, whatever, with the digital twin of this grid, it will react as if it's connected to the actual grid. So this is a very powerful way to test these technologies because we can create any scenario that is possible in the actual grid on the digital twin. We can push the technologies to its boundaries and make sure that it works under any circumstances. And this is how we can actually accelerate the adoption, because imagine if you want to do these testing on the actual grid, we have to install in the grid. Not only we have to take the risk in case the technology malfunction, but also we have to wait years for those kind of scenarios to naturally happen in the grid and see whether the technology is working or not. But those years of waiting can be compressed into a few weeks in the Agile lab because we're dealing with the digital and not the actual thing. There are many other use cases like control room advisory, predictive operations, education and training, and some others. My favorite one is the last one, which is the collaborative decision-making among stakeholders. Basically, it means that unlike today's practice, where engineers from different disciplines, even though they work on the same grid, they work on different simulation platforms, which creates some discrepancies, some problems. We envision this digital twin to be one platform, one digital representation of the grid that can serve engineers from different disciplines so that they can all work on the same platform. And if one engineer changes something on the grid, engineers from the other group can see the impact on his or her work. We can go to the next slide to just give you a high-level dissection of the New York State grid digital twin we're creating. So in the heart of it, you'll see the transmission models, electromagnetic transit models for different years that allows us to move in time, backward, forward. It has some interfaces with the distribution feeders as well. So there has been already designated placeholders for distribution feeders, different years, different areas. There will be a market emulation that allows us to analyze how the market operation will impact the system operation. I mentioned about communication network emulation as well, and there will be a single source of truth, which is one database that has all of the attributes, all of the data of the grid models in one standard unified form. You might have heard about CIM, Common Information Modeling. And this single source of truth, which is a database that allows any other simulation platform to extract data out of it. This way, we're going to synchronize different simulation platforms so they don't develop discrepancies. And there are many inputs to this digital twin, as you can see on the right and left side, to basically feed data into the digital twin, as well as allowing the user to interact with us. So from top left, you see real-time data, reported data for past and future events, what-if scenarios, recorded scenarios that the digital twin can replay, some virtual reality-based control rooms that allows us to analyze the decisions by the operator, how it will impact the system operation. Also, it can be used as an education platform for operators. To the right side, virtualized equipment, which are basically the type of models that you will receive from the developers of renewable energy resources, for example, black box model. Can be interfaced. Actual equipment I mentioned, it can be interfaced. And if there is any digital twin or models of other energy systems or asset monitoring systems or specific components, that can be also integrated into this platform. I mentioned about the actual equipment being interfaced. So the next slide is showing one of the other initiatives that we have now in Agile, hopefully will be done by end of this year, is basically creating a power hardened loop interface. So far we have been developing interfaces required for software technologies as well as hardware technologies that interface or exchange signals with the grid. For example, protection relays, RTACs, things like that. But this specific test bed basically allows us to directly connect a power device like a battery storage system, a PV inverter with the simulator. So this way we can apply realistic grid voltage levels and transients and under the device under test, and the device under test will react as if it's kind of energized by the actual grid. So it's a great and powerful way of testing these equipment. So for example, if you have a PV inverter or another device that you're wondering whether it complies with section XYZ of IEEE 1547 or section XYZ of IEEE 2800, we can actually verify that in the lab with this capability. We can go to the next slide. So I will finish with two slides and example projects that we just to give you an idea how Agile can be utilized for what projects can be utilized. The first one is actually the project that Mike mentioned already, economic assessment of DLR, where our production cost model running on our HPC facility was utilized to see where we can decrease the congestion in Northern New York and how it can generate more revenue. The next one is about battery storage in a hybrid PV plants, basically, and this was funded by DOE, looking into how can we operate these plants that not only becomes economic to the owner of the plant, but also can provide some services to the grid to enhance the transient stability. Again, our model of simulation were utilized. Next one is actually about PFC, the third one, where we looked at, again, production cost modeling was utilized on HPC, how PFC can increase the capacity or tap to the capacity of the network that is not utilized. And related to that, the fourth one was a project NIPA initiated to see how protection systems will be impacted by the PFCs, because especially this kind of PFC is a voltage source converter. It will change the angle of the voltages and losses, so it can easily impact the protection lines, the protection system of the lines. So we did the studies, we created models, very accurate models of the lines, and we created the hardware in the loop setup. We had replicas of those protection relays. We brought it to the lab, we put it in loop with the simulator, and we did a lot of tests to see how it will be impacted. And some of the actually parameters has to be fine-tuned. The last one on this slide is basically a project funded by DOE looking into how beyond the meter DRs, if they're deployed on a very high penetration, thousands and thousands of them in the distribution system will impact, can be utilized to provide grid services. So we created a very large TND modeling simulation, co-simulation actually. The transmission was the full New York State grid. Distribution was a couple of feeders of Central Hudson. I think the total bus was like 20,000 buses. And the nice thing was that because the co-simulation platform was running in real time, we could connect it to a DERMS system. The DERMS could receive awarded data schedules from market and could basically work with the DRs under its jurisdiction to change the set points to realize that they had a schedule. And we could show that it was done successfully. One of the nice findings of this project that we're not expecting, what we saw in the simulation was that when we saw that when we have a lot of DRs, if they're not equipped with right controls, they can jeopardize the stability of the system. So any fault that could be trivial to the current system could impact the system into instability. But with the right controls, actually, they could work even better than synchronous generators. We can go to the next slide. The next example from top is about cybersecurity. So we have communication network emulation. We did a project for DOE in collaboration with New York University. They had a technology for cyber intrusion detection system. So we created a model of our communication network. We put it in the loop with the power grid simulation, and we created a lot of different cyber attacks and to see basically how the technology from NYU would react. Will it detect these cyber attacks or not? The next one is actually the one that, again, Mike already presented. It's about how the 9-gigawatt offshore will influence stability of the grid. So in Agile, together with the Clarkson University, we created a very detailed model of the 9 gigawatt offshore wind switching level, ENT. And it was computation is so demanding that we had to dedicate one simulator just to host the 9 gigawatt offshore wind. And then through some analog input and outputs, we make the connection to another simulator where we used that was used to simulate the grid. A lot of the studies were done there, and we actually showed that this 9 gigawatt offshore wind with a configuration that was simulated could actually impact the stability of the grid, create some subsynchronous oscillations, for example. The next one, the third, is there's a project again funded by DOE. It's actually a consortium called Unify. In this project, in this consortium, we created a very detailed model of the grid-forming inverters you might have heard about. Is the buzzword these days. So we created these models for real-time simulations with different controls, and actually we could create a smaller scale grid that was 100% running on grid-forming inverters, no synchronous generators. And the plan is to basically do the same with the New York State grid model. The last two ones are going to the area of asset management. Might be interesting to other utilities because this has happened to NYPA. In the first project, we have been approached by one of the vendors who claimed that they have an intelligent application that can monitor the health of CTPTs. And NYPA wouldn't want to deploy in the field without thorough investigation. So we brought that application to the lab. We created a very accurate model of CTPTs. And we sent measurements from the simulated CTPTs to the application. We created many different kinds of faults to see whether the application picked them up. And interestingly, for some of the faults, the application was not really performing well. So we provide this feedback to the vendor. They fine-tune the algorithm. There has been some iterations before it was final, and now actually it is now operationalizing in a couple of our sites. The last one is automated generator model validation. This is again another application that was claimed by a vendor. You probably might know that based on the NERC requirements, every few years, the dynamic models of the synchronous generators have to be validated. So the current practice is that the generation owner shut the synchronous generator down and for a few hours or even a day, run some tests to do the model validation. Now, the vendor claims that they have an application that can do it on the fly. So you don't need to shut down your generator. You don't need to lose your revenue. As it's generating revenue, it can be tested. We brought it to the lab. We're now in the process of testing it. If it becomes successful, then it will be deployed and it will save a lot of money for any generation owner. With that, I would like to leave you. We can go to the next slide with a QR code. That basically takes to a document that can provide more information about Agile. I forgot also to mention that Claude, you asked a very excellent question that, as we're integrating more technologies into the grid, how can we make sure they don't interact with each other? Because, for example, these three technologies, PFC, battery storage, DLR, especially PFC battery storage, they're not monitoring, they're actively trying to control the same thing, which is active power. How can we make sure that they don't fight with each other? So I think the question, I want to actually expand on that question, and I want to say, okay, how can we make sure that these do not impact the other systems that we already have in this system? We have voltage regulators, we have protection systems. So we need a platform that can give us a holistic view. So instead of testing them in isolation, we have to have the full grid with all of these systems modeled or somehow integrated in the same platform and see how they can work with each other, because these systems are not necessarily governed by a higher level control. They have their own autonomy and can easily fight with each other. And I think this is one thing that we can add to our control plan to give us a holistic view of the future grid.
That's great.
Thank you.
Question? Yeah, I've got a question. First of all, this is fantastic. I mean, I think I'm really happy to see the progress. I hadn't ended up reading out for a little while, and this is really going to be a powerful tool. One of the conversations, so right now, when you connect energy storage in New York State, if you're connecting through the SIR process, you're using smart inverters, and you're going to ascribe some sort of ballpark curve or power factor response for your energy storage that's tailored and fixed. And in the energy storage task force, we had discussions of what should we assume in the documents and all that going forward. And this is not something that the Bulvar curve that's being ascribed in the interconnections right now is a best guess, not to my knowledge a well-derived process. And it's not at all clear that on every circuit you want that same Bulvar curve, or you want all the devices even to have the same Bulvar curve. It seems like your tool is the perfect tool to answer those questions. So really the question to you is that the case? Is that something that you might be able to start to look into of understanding for the interconnection process for energy storage, what sort of Bulvar curves would really want, and whether they really should standardize it all in every utility locked to one. And how do we best update that? And how do we best design for the future on those things?
Yeah, I agree with this. So we need to populate battery storage or any other technology in a high penetration and degree, and basically we'll see how they interact with each other. This tool can certainly be used for planning or assessing the technologies as well. However, when you mentioned guess, or maybe if we want to use planning tools that are currently the current practice, this can still be continued. The current tools can be still utilized, but the outcome of the tools can be deployed in the digital twin as if it's deployed in the actual grid, right? And we see whether our guess or our simplified planning was good enough or not.
The other thing is, once we have the digital twin up and ready, hopefully sometime next year, one of the customers or stakeholders that can leverage is New York ISO with all the interconnection queues and the backlogs that they have. We can help expedite some of these studies as well.
Yeah, I think this would be really powerful. I think we're already seeing some of this. I mean, some of our conversations with Con Ed, for instance, and others, it's already obvious that, one size doesn't fit all on these things. And we really have to start understanding that. And I think this is the tool to do it.
Yeah, and to add to that, at the lab, I mean, I don't know if Hussein did talk about it, but you can speak to what your Opal RT and RTDS simulators are.
Mm-hmm.
Each utility can't afford to buy their own to have the simulation that they need to do to get those answers. It's more to have a better idea of, I don't know how many modules you have now in the new system, but it's nobody has that whole Opal RT RTDS simulators that can allow you to get those answers for the entire state. And if everybody needs to buy all of them themselves, it's a ton of money that's going to be spent on equipment that could be standardized and utilized throughout the entire.
And the fact that the models, it took us 6 years.
Yeah, we got the models, but you also got the tool there to make it happen, which is a big investment. So.
Hussein, thank you for the exciting presentation, and it's really great to hear about the opening coming soon of the new facility. As you think about the New York model, that's available today, and then the one that'll become available, in the next year as you continue to develop the digital twin, an opportunity I could envision, picking up on Mike's, thread earlier about federal versus state goals. So, DOE working at earlier or lower technology readiness levels versus where NYSERDA and a lot of the state utilities are. I was just wondering about accessibility of the New York State model information, through your facility. Because often at Brookhaven National Lab, we'll have federal funding for a project where we're trying to develop a possible future grid capability or model at lower TRL, and the data, the model that we're using to test it and evaluate it isn't New York specific, because, you know, what's accessible to us isn't the same, you know, type of model that's, you know, accessible within, you know, a facility like you have. The benefit I can envision is then if you can test it both in kind of a broad, you know, US way, but also in a more local way, it may help us to get more rapidly from these TRL 1 to 5 up to TRL, you know, 5 to 10 solutions that could be relevant to New York. But, you know, as we've been talking about, it's always about the use case and it's about, you know, the specifics of your grid. So I was just wondering, we can talk further offline, but I wanted to get kind of initial thought from you and Mike on how that might work.
Yeah, as I mentioned, this is envisioned to be, and it is already a one-stop shop for all of the New York State grid stakeholders. So the doors of the lab is open to everybody. And I think so far we have been partnered with over 50 entities, universities, with DNO actually, with other national labs. The lab is open to everyone. We will be happy to collaborate with you on more projects. However, due to some, you know, restrictions about confidentiality of the data, etc., there might be some restrictions, but that restrictions will not prevent you from running your tests in the lab. So the data has to stay in the cyber environment of the Agile. It cannot, you know, leave the Agile lab, but we can provide you access, even remote access to the Agile lab, so you can get access to that environment and run your tests and analysis.
That's great. You know, and an approach we've used on other projects sometimes, if there's data or results that are interesting and could be impactful toward publication, then there's a review process with the entity with the data, make sure that we're not disclosing something that's secret and it's benefit.
Yeah, and to add to that, we would sponsor a project like with Clarkson University. They would do whatever they need to sign the NDA, build the models that would house there, or with an organization like Quanta, an engineering firm that would utilize that tool to help them do whatever they need to do. So there's been history of just a university, private entity, whoever has been working in that to help them get their answers.
And we've got contracts in place actually with Brookhaven also, master agreement to do work, so.
Yeah.
Just reach out to us.
We submitted full application.
Yes.
You just see the need for this is just getting greater and greater and
no, and
getting out there.
We have one in our department who's very productive and working with you, which is great. I just always like when we're in a forum like this to brainstorm about how we can deepen that partnership. So, thanks.
Sam, thanks much for the presentation, and probably this is a question for both Mike and you, and maybe national labs as well. I mean, again, this is Rod Dagger from National Grid speaking for those on the phone. The future carbon neutral economy falls on us to be more efficient, to be more, you know, saving in every electron we can. And with the world that we in today, and probably this is very futuristic, but we take everything that's coming in the DC form and we convert it into AC. Have you start looking at where the efficiencies can be from DC to DC? You know, most of our home electronics, everything is at DC. Have you looking into the future beyond the today, talking about future when we are looking at the carbon neutral economy? Where is that work going and where is that happening?
Westinghouse and Edison already looked at that,
Well,
right?
but they settled it 100 years ago, but now that's like 10% are not experiencing the growth of renewable energy or the renewable energy.
I think that there is some cases where HVDC becomes very efficient.
Yeah.
And I think this ties back to what you mentioned about the HVDC mesh, right? In Long Island. So that once, I don't know in what stage is that, but as it becomes more official, that will be added to our digital twin. So this will be another version of the digital twin that can be basically used for analysis.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Rod, we understand that, and what we're trying to do is just figure out what solutions makes best sense for us as a state. I know we did a research project with NYPA that even looked into lower frequency AC. Just because, you know, at 15 hertz, you can move more power and with less, you know, impedance than at 60 hertz. So those type of things that can aid us in doing what we need to do to meet these goals. And then that becomes that powerful tool that allows you to plug and play to get those answers to see what makes sense.
I can give you a rule of thumb, by the way, for offshore wind models that we did in the NYSERDA funded project. Any site that was away or more than 100 kilometers distant from the point of interconnection, HVDC was utilized to make the connection. And anyone that was less than that, HVAC was utilized. I think that's the balance you're looking for, the rule of thumb.
Can I ask a question not related to that DC fight between Tesla and Tesla? on your presentation, you talked about behind the meter work that you're doing with the TV. How deep into the system are you reaching? Are you reaching to individual systems, or are you at the node level looking at aggregating systems?
Well, so the system was TND, right? Transmission is everything down to 34.5, and then we go down to distribution as well. I don't think we've gone to the residential level. The one level above that, we've reached that. The DRs are, I think we have connected at least 1,000 dealers explicitly to the distribution feeder, and some others because we needed to go above like 6 gigawatt of total capacity. Some of them were aggregated because we couldn't really, model them individually, but at least 1,000 of them we did it. But the capacity was like anything between 2 kilowatt to 12 kilowatt, depending on the DR.
And how does that relate to rural area where you have long distribution network and not very many, DR connected?
That's a great one. Now your question reminded me of another finding that we found that sometimes you have installed capacity of, let's say, 10 megawatt on a feeder, and it's no time they're PVs, let's say, and in the simulation we push them to generate max, but at the point of interconnection we received like 5 megawatt, and this was very confusing in the beginning. Then we found that because of those long feeders and because of the voltage violations, they cannot really push as much as they potentially can.
Yeah.
So these are the things that pop up in the simulation results.
Great work, thank you.
Yeah.
Jason, we've got one question that came in the chat, and I think we probably heard part of the answer already, Hossein, but I'll ask you to be specific. Question is the digital twin focused on the transmission system or the distribution system as well? And the second part is there a cybersecurity or confidential information issue that you're taking care of, you're concerned about? Are there any issues around cybersecurity or confidential?
Scope-wise, as I mentioned, we want to have a holistic view. So not only TND, but also communication network, the cyber layer, as well as markets. This is the boundary that we've defined for ourselves. In terms of cyber security, does that mean that if somebody shares data with us, how we're going to protect that? Is that the question?
Not specific enough, but it was
Is
a
it about-
CDII and cybersecurity question.
Well, there are NDAs in place, as well as some very strict rules by our cyber. So, for example, when a user gets access to our simulation platform, there are some, IT accounts created for that person, and only that person has access to it, so no other people can do it. And the access provided after a thorough background check. And then once the project is done, the whole account will be wiped out.
So this project was about the timelines only, and this is within the NIPOS firewall, behind the NIPOS firewall, but a segregated, it's not connected to the NIPOS business or operations network, so it's a segregated island that we created. That's why we removed the lab up here in Albany to have that, it's not part of, our operations network, so they're completely separate.
That's a very good point. So the lab by default cannot be accessed through internet.
Okay. So, but eventually when you move, it becomes integrated into the real system. Then that cybersecurity means that it has to be very dynamic because the threat is constantly and it's always evolving, and people are, one step ahead of the protection.
I think your question is that since we're receiving data from the control room in real time, there is a connection, right? But the TL environment is completely separate from the IT environment. I'm sorry, the OT environment. The OT environment is completely separate from the IT environment. So the link from our control room or the control room in general has no connection with the internet. It's a separate network, isolated network.
Any other questions? Moving on.
Thanks. So I'm Amy Marshlock from Brookhaven National Lab. Also on the line remotely is Meng Yue, who leads our grid modeling effort at Brookhaven. And so I'd like to describe some of the capabilities we've been developing that we think can be relevant toward future grid opportunities. Next slide, please. And so if we start with an overview of grid modeling, where we see opportunities in this space for Brookhaven are to contribute to grid modeling and simulation, data analytics and machine learning, and probabilistic risk assessment of various types. And so, in the following slides, I'll go through some examples in additional detail. We're thinking about both steady state and dynamic impacts of renewables, ways to apply modern techniques like machine learning. We have a lot of expertise in physics-based approaches to systems and simulate systems of different types using techniques we develop in-house. We're also thinking about abilities to detect anomalies to reduce risk and improve security of the systems, ways to forecast and achieve resilience to extreme weather events, and then also thinking about different ways to model and quantify uncertainty, stochastic optimization for energy storage, siting and sizing, and probabilistic damage modeling for future forecasts. Next slide, please. And so if we think about probabilistic energy storage and siting, sizing as an example, thinking about spatial and temporal effects is really an essential element when you think about renewable generation and integrating renewables into the grid. So we're thinking about dynamics over different timescales. We're thinking about opportunities to understand and address both long-term and short-term effects of climate change. So I'll give an example in the following slide of a climate change effect that we've modeled. But we see capability really for probabilistic planning with the type of work we do. And so we're funded, primarily as a national lab by the U.S. Department of Energy. We have multiple projects integrating with New York State partners, but we're excited to continue to deepen that relationship moving forward. And so of the, publications that we're highlighting here, I won't have time to go through all of them in detail, but from the perspective of probabilistic contingency analysis, I wanted to bring up one recent publication as an example of how we think about renewable generation in this space. So, a challenge from the perspective of transmission planning is accounting for impacts of renewables. So, Meng and Raj from our department led a contingency analysis to help meet transmission planning guidelines relevant to criteria mandated by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. So introducing intermittency-induced outages for a single renewable plant and then common load outages for multiple plants, provided a proof of concept as ways to think about penetration of renewables for transmission planning. So that's an example that relates to the question I brought up earlier, because the data we used in that case was Western electrical connection system data, because that's a partner we were working with. But I think models and approaches like this, in New York, it's not about onshore wind, it's about offshore wind. That's the type of modeling that we could easily do in the future. And it's great, to talk more about possibilities. Next slide, please. So this is an example of an internally funded project led by Meng in collaboration with Mike Jensen from Brookhaven's Climate Science Department. And so the goal here was to think about challenges relating to overhead power. This is an issue that persist in much of New York, particularly in the Orange and Rockland territory. And Constantine from Con Edison and Brian from Orange and Rockland were co-authors on the report we issued here. And so the idea was to try to model and predict when power outages may occur due to failure of overhead cables. And so by looking at weather events and using weather reflectivity, precipitation and wind, there was an opportunity to model considering both failure rate and known outages in the system and be able to more reliably predict when there could be an issue coming up in the service area. So you see in the black and red data there, the outages affiliated with Hurricane Irene that incorporate real data in development and testing of Monk's model here. Next slide, please. And so we're also thinking about integrating modeling across transmission and distribution systems. So looking at ways to model the adequacy of inverter resources of different types, looking at intermittency-induced outages and common mode outages, as I commented on earlier, and then also opportunities to capture interactions among dynamics over different scales. We're also looking at high voltage direct current mesh network modeling that could be applied both to onshore and offshore systems. And so, looking at systems which can be described simply, but also systems that are more complex, I think is a capability that we have at the lab. Thinking about systems that have transient dynamics that are nonlinear and using new mathematical approaches to address. Next slide. As a national lab, we also have real expertise in handling secure data and thinking about improvement for secure future systems. And so we've been thinking about cybersecurity of the cloud and new ways to implement effective virtual power plants, because that's another possibility we see coming from the line, transition from systems that are contained locally to systems that are more distributed. Identifying threats and using deep learning approaches to track threat information and address threats associated with information sharing. We're also incorporating machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we have really nice computational resources at Brookhaven, but we also have expertise in employing new techniques like machine learning and AI, which are still at that lower TRL early stage, but can really give benefit for the future in efficient and lower cost systems. So some work led by Meng and Tian Zhao in our department looked at a framework to integrate safety constraints into reinforcement learning-based control design. So by incorporating trustworthy AI and ML applications, we can actually improve the safety of our grid rather than putting it at risk. Next slide, please. And so we're thinking about dynamic assessment and control design of the system. Emergency operations, opportunities for deep reinforcement learning to help improve emergency response and emergency control. A coordinated nonlinear control design. So the issue of grid warning versus grid following inverters is a modern issue that's coming up today. Being able to think about systems that function on new timescales as we get away, as Mike said earlier, from these systems which have large inertia. That's a real challenge in the future grid. So we're looking at ways to address that mathematically. And what's really good about the work that we do, as a requirement of much of our federal funding, we do go through the publication process, the peer review process. So we're able to develop models that have been vetted through that system. Next slide, please. And so in terms of expertise and facilities, that we deploy, we have Northeast Solar Research Center Array located on our campus. So it's a 900 kilowatt solar facility connected to a portion of the electric grid. We have it implemented for environmental electrical data acquisition with a smart grid technology and equipment test bed. And we have an active project with Binghamton University called ADAPT, where we're installing an energy storage system on the grid and we'll be testing it, testing its function along with NSERV later this year. So we're looking forward to that. We also have a 32 megawatt AC solar voltaic plant on our site. This was built through a collaboration of BP Solar, LIPA, and the Department of Energy. So while it's privately owned, there is we now installed instrumentation throughout the array, which could provide data for future projects. And so, an opportunity we see in our space is demonstrations of different types. We are a federal enclave, and so we do have a large campus, which can be used for testing of different types. And so we're looking forward to hosting here for the possible opportunity Mike mentioned earlier, thinking about testing of transmission system. Next slide, please. And so switching gears a little bit, as the interdisciplinary science department, one of the things that makes us special at Brookhaven is that we've really integrated the energy systems expertise and grid modeling that I described already, and then also expertise in energy storage systems. And so as a national lab, we're looking at how to understand the function of energy storage systems. We have research projects looking at possible next generation or future energy storage that are low TRL, but we also have some high quality characterization tools and capabilities that can help understand function of battery systems. And so I spent 3 years in Western New York at a battery company before transitioning to academics at the National Lab. And our department chair, Esther Takeuchi, actually developed the battery that powers the implantable cardiac defibrillator. She's internationally known for this and received the National Medal of Technology and Innovation from President Obama, recognizing her work. And what's really exciting having Esther as a leader is that the technology she developed here in New York is still marketed and sold here and actually impacts people worldwide. The difference when we think about the grid versus an implantable application is that the cost is a big driver for the grid, but the similarity is that you need a system that can have reliable long-term function, and you need to model that really effectively. And that's an area where we have expertise to bring to bear those functions. So what I'm showing here is just some of the different types of data we can collect. The synchrotron facility in the lower left is one of the brightest light sources in the US and around the world. With a bright light source, you can get information about systems under active use or active function, and that can be important for understanding the function of a resource like a battery. Next slide, please. So we're doing work on lithium-based systems, but we're also doing work on future safe, low-cost, environmentally friendly batteries. So we're looking at opportunity for systems which can be non-flammable and address and mitigate some of the cost and safety issues associated with certain implementations. I had the opportunity to contribute to a review article on grid-scale energy storage back in 2022. That pie chart at the top shows that in the US, as of that time, about 70% of the operational energy storage systems for the grid were lithium ion. As we move forward now, I think lithium ion will continue to have penetration because it is a high technology readiness level system that can meet a time and need to employ storage. But as we continue toward the future, having multiple solutions will be valuable, and having systems which can be low cost based on more sustainable systems can also be a benefit. So that's something we will continue to investigate. And an opportunity we see is to understand and reduce risk for deployment of some of these future systems. So as Mike said, it's exciting to see deployments from companies like Zinc8, being done in New York. Whenever you're going with new technology, there's a risk around understanding its function. But when you take an old technology and deploy it in a new way, that can also create a risk. So, there's a lot known about transportation application. There's been a lot of investment there, at the federal level. But as we go toward large-scale storage, long-duration storage, I think there continues to be a need for talking about specific use cases as well as what specifics the technology can do. So that's the last slide here. Thank you.
Any questions in the room? Okay. None on the phone? Good. Thank you. Thank you. And we're switching over to, I think, the last topic of the day, advanced technology concept papers.
Yes, we're just going to take a couple of minutes to provide an update. King alluded to this in his opening remarks that in January, the Commission issued an order to the ATWG encouraging us, ordering us to open the pipeline a bit and look at some new ideas that we might pick up to take through our technology screening and assessment process. And we'll get to this in a moment. I can tell you a little bit about what we received, but just wanted to remind people, when you look at what we're about, we're really focused on trying to improve deliverability of renewable energy by reducing the T&D constraints. So you've heard us talk about a number of different technology areas that we started out with: energy storage, power flow control, and dynamic line rates. So we continue to be on the lookout for those kinds of things. We want to try to optimize the infrastructure that the state of New York has at this moment. We want to also try to increase load factor and other things that will help us squeeze more out of the infrastructure that we've got. We want to see beneficial outcomes that include reliability. We want to integrate more with clean energy resources. We want to be making sure we're reducing costs for consumers the whole while, and generally advance the state-of-the-art technology in New York. So when we think about what we're looking for, and we went out to do this call for project concept papers, we were considering system planning, system operations, things related to infrastructure, even asset management or other kinds of integration type opportunities. So that's what we were looking for when we put out the call for advanced technology ideas. Go to the next slide, Jason. Here's what we got. We got 15 concept papers. And what's interesting is that they covered a new range of topics for us. And we're excited because these are some of the areas that the ATWG had been considering over the past 6 to 12 months. We've got 9 ideas that came in that we're describing as software ideas. Those fell into 3 categories. The first one was DER management and grid flexibility issues. Second one would be grid monitoring and management. The third would be just generally aimed at DERs or the integration of DERs. So that was the software. We had another group that we'll classify as advanced conductors and lines. And we saw compact line design, we saw composite conductors, and we saw superconductors there. I think as you heard Mike talk about just a little while ago, that's another area that's been of real interest in the past. So we're glad to see some things there. We also got 2 ideas coming in the hydrogen space, which isn't surprising given all of the activity that we've seen nationally on hydrogen. We saw one aimed at fuel cell electricity generation and another that was much more holistic, that was looking at production, storage, and then generating electricity from hydrogen. And then the last was a very interesting one that looks specifically at how can we apply technology to cool infrastructure of various types. That would allow us to get more capacity from the existing structure that we have. So that was what we received, 15 concept papers. If you go to the next slide, Jason, we're going to be going through a process that has to be fairly quick. We've got about 2 months to pull together an assessment of the ideas that we received. We're going to start by doing a detailed review with the ATWG members. That will take less than 60 days. And we're going to apply the criteria that we included as we issued that call. We're going to likely have some consultations with at least some and many perhaps of the proposers from whom we received these ideas. And then we'll go ahead and pull together an initial assessment that we will file within 60 days of today's conference. So those are our next steps. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
No questions in the room? Any questions on the phone?
All right, King, I'll pass it to you to close.
Okay, so thank you for everyone for today's session. So you have heard from many folks. So you started hearing from like an update from the task force, from each of the task force. You heard from NYSERDA, some of the projects that they're already funding and how to be applicable to the ATWG. You heard from NYPER about the Agile Lab, how that capability also help out the ATWG too. You also heard from BNL and the wonderful work they do, and also how they fit into the ATWG scope. And last, you just heard from Forrest about just a high-level overview of some of these concept paper we received. As Forrest said, we will need to do an initial assessment over the next within the next 60 days. And just looking out ahead on the schedule itself, we probably have maybe a virtual forum just to engage folks, to let folks know what the initial assessment, some of the results. And then if you can look forward by next year in January, we'll put out an annual report. And not only an annual report, we'll also put out an annual calendar of the events going forward for next year. So those are things you should be looking out for. And lastly, just to remind everyone, we do have that website, the ATW website. Do check it out. We do post items up there. So that's another way to monitor what the ATWG is doing as well. So by that, I want to thank you everyone for coming.
Any last questions, comments for the group before we wrap up? On the phone? No? Well, again, thank you everyone for coming today. Appreciate your time. And we will be posting the slides on the DPS website and the JU website for the group. And again, like King said, if there's any questions or comments going forward, encourage people to reach out to the website and the contacts on there as well. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, I guess we'll make it.